welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. I have seen Cyrano. I took an excursion to Cabo Fresh to get a burrito because I needed to look up some things about this because I'm not incredibly knowledgeable about the source material. And by the way, this had to be one of the rudest screenings I've ever been to. With this group of old women in front of me just fucking talking through the entire thing. What the fuck is wrong with you? Like, you're paying to see the movie. I'm not paying to watch what you think is funny riff tracks on the movie. I mean, the movie wasn't great, but that was, that's neither here nor there. Motherfucker, they really need to have a separate exit over here for people who are trying to get out of the parking lot and make a right instead of just one catch-all for everyone. So, here we are, and I have now seen Cyrano, which chalks another Oscar-nominated movie from this year, puts another feather in my cap, to use the parlance of the times based on that fuck-up at Wheel of Fortune. And now I've seen Cyrano. I can see it making a solid showing at the Academy Awards. I could see it being nominated, or it got nominated for Best Costuming and Best Makeup and whatever. Makeup and hair, or Makeup and Costuming, or whatever the category breakdown is for, like, technical category of movie that, has cool costuming and cool makeup. So, all that said, here we are. That's about the strongest thing for it. And as usual, Peter Dinklage is fun to watch. I'm not going to say that he's not good in the movie. He's very fun to watch, and Haley Bennett's great, too, and the guy who plays Christian's great, too. For me, the movie kind of falls apart when we talk about, like, the plot. Or as some may say, arguably the most important part of a movie is the narrative. Like, what's the point of watching a movie if the story is not there? I mean, and there are movies that try to do inventive things with story, but still at the end of the day, if it's an inventive take on what story means or what it means to have a narrative or anything like that, it's still the narrative that's drawing you to the theater, and it's still the narrative that's, attracting you to watch that movie. So yeah, I think that, like, if we're gonna sit here and we're gonna, point to where this movie falls apart, it is the plot. Because I hate movies that make you feel like there's required reading to enjoy it. That's a pet peeve of mine. Like, I should be able to walk into your movie and have the same experience at that movie as someone who has seen all the many, many, many iterations of this play that has been done cinematically over the last 100 years. That's not an exaggeration either. Like, direct adaptations, there have been, like, 10, and then there have been radio adaptations, and then loose adaptations, like Sierra Burgess' A Loser on Netflix. There was a Disney Channel movie that was, like, loosely based on it. Because it's a pretty easy-to-adapt storyline, especially as we get into the age of texting and all of that, where it's the story of, you have a guy who has deformities, or in this case, is a little person, in the case of Peter Dinklage. Like, in the original, he was physically deformed. Here, he's just a little person. And he has very little self-esteem, to the point where he falls in love with this woman that he's known all of his life, and he thinks she would never fall for him because of his appearance. But, he's in love with her. So, he's, that's all the thing. He's about to confess his love to her, and she confesses that she is in love with someone else. And she would like him to help put them together. So he goes and talks to the guy, and the guy is, he knows that she likes people who can, talk well, as I'm doing a good job of replicating here. And this guy, Christian, he doesn't have that. So what happens is Cyrano will feed lines to Christian for letters and shit of that nature. So that way, Christian can, have the soul that Cyrano does that she loves. And it's one of those things where it's like it gets adapted very easily because it's a story that will work time and time again because, it's a story of what's on the inside that counts, not on the outside. And it's that kind of thing that you get redone over and over and over again. And in this case, it's a musical, and a lot of the music is not tremendous. I think there's one song that I did really like, and it's right toward the end when everyone's getting ready to go to battle, and it's a suicide mission, and it's, all these people doing, oh, son of a bitch with those fucking ambulances, and everyone's kind of getting ready to, go off to war, and they're all kind of accepting the fact that they're about to die, so they're all kind of leaving the suicide notes, and it's kind of really sad, but besides that, it's like, the music's not great, and, if you're going to do a musical, that's the most important part of it. Sorry, not sorry. That is hands down the most important part of this thing. Like, if you're gonna spend the time to do this, you gotta make the music interesting. The music has to work, and if it doesn't, then it won't play. But like the thing is, it's like a lot of it is dependent on you knowing the story of Cyrano going into it. Like, if you don't know the plot going into the movie, you're going to be lost, because it's like, there's only so far suspension of disbelief can go, for me at least, being completely honest. Like, for me, if I'm going to suspend disbelief about about stuff that happens in a movie, I need to have something that resembles I'll suspend disbelief about magic and about, things of that nature, but when it comes to characterization and things like that, you gotta give me something. This movie doesn't do that. You don't get that moment of, oh, and here's the meet. But, that's a big part of a romance, is the meeting between the two people. You don't get the meeting between Christian and Roxanne until Roxanne. Christ, could you imagine? You don't get the meeting until close to the midway point, a little past the midway point of the movie. And it's like, well, you could have had a small moment in the beginning to introduce them and have them meet. And it's like it gets to the point where she's talking to Cyrano and being like, I saw this guy. And it's like, well, you actually saw? I thought that was in your fantasy. And you were fantasy singing while you were sitting in the car or the coach. And it's like, well, okay, I guess we'll just move on from there. And then, all of these things that presume upon you understanding things that aren't explained, that always bugs me. I have a huge pet peeve about movies that do that. Because it's, you are telling me a story. Like any other method of telling a story. If you're writing a book, if you're playing a video game, if you're doing, if someone's just telling you a story, they should be able to clearly tell you the story. It should be, okay, beginning, middle, end, here's what happened, let's go on. And it's like, well, here's key information that we're omitting, and not for any artistic reason, or it'll be like, oh, and then this happened, and it's a twist. It's like, well, no, you're just omitting key information because you're kind of just assuming we know that already. Like, we know the plot of Cyrano, because, the trailer tells you what the plot is and all of that. So, we know going into it. But it just, I don't like when they do that. It's a problem, to me at least, when movies have that. And for me, that's something that takes away from the enjoyment, and it takes away from the overall quality of the movie. Because then what happens is, it kicks your brain into overdrive for something that really doesn't need it. I don't need to sit here and be like, now wait a minute, how does this work? Where it's like, and the thing is too, it's like, there's a weird subtext to this movie where it's like, the guy that they picked to be the body to Cyrano when he's, the guy who is playing Christian, it's a black man. And it feels weird to me that, the person who's, doesn't have the command of the beauty of the English language to make this girl fall in love with him, and he needs the help of this guy as a black man, and it feels a little weird to me on a few levels. On top of the fact that you could have done the same movie and have it basically work very well if Cyrano is a, what's it called? If Cyrano is a, if Cyrano is black. Like, if you're going to do this already, and we're going to use, the dwarfism as the deformity, you could have done it where it's 16th century France. It's not exactly the most open and racially, diverse era to begin with, where this is the kind of thing where you could do that and have it work and have the impact hit. Instead, what you end up with, especially if you're going to do it where you're going to have a black guy and a white guy who are doing this, in this era, a black man being the mouthpiece for the white guy, and the thing that he's afraid of is the perception of him dating or being married to the white woman, that would work. And that would work better than what we got here. And I hate being the armchair screenwriter or anything like that, or in this case, armchair casting director, but it just kind of feels strange to me that was the decision they went with. And it's one of those things where it's like, I mean, Peter Dinklage is still a very handsome man. He's just not as tall as normal, as regular people. It's one of those things where it's like, I don't quite understand what the decision-making there was. And it's one of those things where I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it and I'm like, there's no real reason not to like, the movie works on, technical level, and there are a few technical things that I'm like, oh, that's a little weird. There are some editing choices that I would have been like, can we do some reshoots to try and smooth that out? There are some times where it's very obviously people are lip-syncing. I'm not 100% convinced that that's Haley Bennett's voice doing the singing for at least one of her big musical numbers, considering how much deeper she sounds than other times. And it's kind of like, I feel like, all of that aside, it's like, it's pretty, the production design's great, the costuming is great, but for me, if the narrative is uneven, that's too much of a hump for me to get over. And I know there are people who don't have that problem. If you want to go see a very, well done and well executed movie with great costumes, the costuming is, the be all and end all of the movie, by all means, this is the movie for you. If you want to see, that, and then also get a cohesive experience that also feels like they're not shortchanging the narrative plot to the point where you're like, hang on, let me try and mentally backtrack while watching this movie to figure out what's going on in a musical romance movie. I mean, look, I have no problem with a thinking movie, but a musical romance based on Cyrano de Bergerac, which has been around for almost 200 years, or almost 150 years, it's not something that you should have to sit there and be like, oh, okay, well, that's, I shouldn't have to do that. That shouldn't be a requirement to enjoy this movie. And if it is any, musical comedy, it's like, La La Land doesn't require that. Watching, I'm using La La Land as the example because it came out in 2016, and it's, it's a musical romance, and it's like, you don't have to sit here and be like, pause, rewind, let's figure out where we are, let's sit here and regroup. And maybe it's just the fact that, when I watch, Avengers Endgame, I complained about dumb lines that are like, we just gotta sit here and make sure that everyone's caught up, where it's like, there's the one line when he's about to put the gauntlet on and the Hulk goes, yeah, but the radiation's mostly gamma, it's like I was made for this. I'm like, you don't need the I was made for this line. But then it was explained to me, or explained on a podcast, that, those lines are helpful because not everyone is on the same page. And this moment is designed to be like, okay, we have everyone, we haven't lost anyone, everyone's on the same page. Going into the third act, that's an important piece of information. So I was like, oh, okay, I can buy that now. And, maybe this movie just needed a little more of that, or maybe to show Roxanne and Christian meeting at some point, or to, at a certain point, it's like when Cyrano is introduced, everyone kind of knows who Cyrano is, and no one's kind of off-put by Cyrano, except for the guy he ends up killing, which, by the way, Cyrano kills a lot of people in this movie, and people are just kind of cool with it. So Cyrano, like, that would have been the easiest way to get rid of Cyrano. It's like, he committed murder. He killed 11 people. Like, that would have been the easy, like, at minimum, he killed 1 and assaulted 10. Like, at that point, like, all that the guy had to do was be like, alright, well, we'll just put him in jail. Fuck, why do we need to go through all this stuff to, it's fucking dumb. And anyway, it's like, you know, the issue with it becomes, the lack of, you know, like, explanation as to what he's doing is annoying, because, like, they introduce him and it's like, oh, he's a theater critic, and then it's, oh, he's a poet, and then it's like, oh no, he's in the Guard of ambiguously France, I think it is, like, you know, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, cool, and then, like, the whole thing in the beginning about, like, Roxanne needing to marry Rich is kind of completely forgotten about and thrown away almost entirely because it's not important after the opening musical number, which is, you know, cool, I guess. Like, you know, fuck, I don't, like, why'd you spend so much time on, like, she needs to marry Rich, in the opening musical number if that's not going to end up having a meaningful impact, besides the fact that her, what's it called, the guy that she was set up with and was presumably spurned, kind of pushed everything, like, it's so just, you know, like, the fact that everyone around her is kind of like the woman who's kind of like her valet is like, you need to marry Rich, you don't have a lot of money, you're an orphan, and they literally say that in the beginning, and then in the third act, or at the very end of the movie, I seem to recall them pointing out that, like, oh, your dad. I'm like, hold on. I mean, granted, the parents could have died after that, but still, it still feels like, you know, a weird thing to have happen. And there are just a lot of weird choices in this movie. I don't know. Maybe skip seeing Cyrano in theaters. I mean, look, the Batman's out right now. If you're listening to this podcast, I probably don't need to tell you again to go see the Batman. But yeah, I don't think that, you know, Cyrano is necessarily worth the trip to the theater to see. There's nothing in it that's that particularly, like, the costuming is great. If you want to see costuming that's, like, you know, like the costume designers were at the top of their game for this. If you want to see that, then yeah, see this movie in theaters. Other than that, you can wait till it goes to HBO Max, or it's MGM, so it's probably going to go to Amazon Prime, if I were to venture a guess. So, yeah, so we'll wrap up there for today. We will be back. I'm going to finish the third episode of The Dropout tonight. So I'm going to do The Dropout episodes 1, 2, and 3. Which, again, I always feel weird doing a beware of spoilers for something based on real events. I always feel weird about that, because it's like, oh, well, I can, you know, go on Wikipedia and find this out, which is what I did for The Dropout. But it is, you know, it's a really good show, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So yeah, so until then, have a great rest of your week.